And now for something completely different, as Monty Python was inclined to say. That's the only technology I have to offer, which is a kite. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Ono, Richard Harknett, and the committee for inviting me to participate in this interesting and exciting series of seminars, The Life of the Mind. And I'd like to thank you all for coming out today to get the show on the road, so to speak. With an eye on keeping my thoughts on a somewhat linear track, which they're not inclined to stay on, rather than getting lost in a tangle of extemporized rhetorical tangents, I will read what I have to say today from my prepared notes, but I hope this doesn't sound too impersonal and rigid. There are two aspects to my role as thought provocateur today. Firstly, I want to provoke all of you into thinking about technology in political rather than technical or material terms. Secondly, I'd like to provoke those of you in the student body looking for interesting courses to take to check out what the philosophy department has to offer in the area of the relatively new discipline of the history of philosophy of science and technology. My remarks today will introduce you to one narrow corner of that burgeoning discipline. The artifacts of technology pervade our lives. We live in them, work and play with them, read and write with them, wear them as clothes, make them, purchase them, and constantly cope with them. We live and die with them, and we even eat them. Just think of a Big Mac and the global network of industrialized agriculture it takes to produce one. More recently, technology has caught the attention of philosophers, posing unique and interesting problems for many of the traditional areas of philosophy. For example, while metaphysicians explore the ontological status of technological artifacts, epistemologists inquire into the relation between human and artificial intelligence. Moral philosophers ask, is technology value neutral or value laden? Political philosophers concern themselves with the relation between democracy, capitalism, and technology. And philosophers of science stress the practices and instruments of technoscience rather than the concepts and theories of pure science. My talk will focus on the relation between politics and technology. But first, I want to consider the question, what is technology? Of course, only a philosopher could ask that question, right? Like other philosophers, philosophers of technology are concerned with the meaning of their terms, in this case, technology. In particular, many of them find the conventional, commonsensical conception of technology, that is, as a tool or artifact used to aid or extend human activity, inadequate to their purposes in two respects. Technologies, they argue, are not merely aids to human activity, but powerful forces that reshape that activity and its meaning. For example, the introduction of robots and computers in the workplace not only increased productivity, but also changed the process of production, redefining what work meant, if not abolishing it altogether for some people. The narrow identification of technology with tools or hardware also ignores the important fact that such tools cannot perform their function of extending human capacities unless embedded in socio-technical systems of use. For example, the automobile cannot do what the automobile does, move ourselves and our stuff around, unless it is embedded in an elaborate system of roads, gas stations, repair shops, laws of ownership and operation, rules of the road, etc. Medical artifacts like X-ray and NMR machines, scalpels, and stethoscopes can extend our capacity for health only if integrated into the sophisticated network of medical practice associated with modern clinics and hospitals. Similarly, the instruments of war, guns, tanks, grenades, and bombs, are integrated into armies, navies, and air forces, which are systems for extending our capacity to kill and oppress other people. On this view, technologies are ordered systems of people and machines that depend for their proper functioning not only on reliable hardware and technical knowledge, but also on the establishment of specific economic, social, cultural, political, and psychological conditions. Technologies are not simply ways of reproducing the physical existence of human beings. Rather, they are definite forms of human activity, definite modes of existence, or as Wittgenstein put it, definite forms of life. In making our technologies work, we need to ask ourselves what kind of world we are making. Here we will focus on the question, what kind of political world are we making? Now, politics and technology. See, I did use it. Okay, there you go. Recent research by historians of technology show that even seemingly innocuous design features of the most mundane technologies actually mask profoundly political choices and circumstances, both intended and unintended. For example, the famously low-hanging overpasses on the Long Island Parkway were designed by the equally famous civil engineer Robert Moses in the 20s and 30s, according to specifications that discouraged the presence of buses on them, and thereby the access of racial minorities and low-income groups who rode buses rather than cars to such comfortable middle-class venues as Jones Beach. The roads and avenues of Paris were engineered at the direction of Louis Napoleon to prevent the recurrence of the street fighting that fomented the Revolution of 1848. The sweeping boulevards and thoroughfares that delight and charm modern tourists were designed to rob insurrectionists of their cover in the narrow streets and back alleys of the old city, and to facilitate the speedy and efficient delivery of police and army units to hotspots and flashpoints. The mechanization of industrial production in the 19th and 20th centuries was designed not only to increase productivity, but also to de-skill and thereby cheapen labor and undercut the political clout of the skilled workers who spearheaded the union movement. This is not to claim that all technology is the result of a political plot, the product of a conspiracy. For example, whatever the intention of the inventors and users, the very size and cost of modern harvesters are compatible only with highly concentrated forms of agricultural production, which favors the interests of agribusiness at the expense of the family farm. What we have here is an ongoing social process in which technical invention, university expertise, and corporate profits reinforce each other in deeply entrenched patterns of political and economic power. All use is laden with interests and power, and many of those who oppose modern technologies are not anti-technology or anti-progress, but leery of the power embodied in them. Technology, power, and freedom. Two versions of technology, one authoritarian and the other democratic, exist side by side in the history of Western political thought. A clear and forceful statement of the democratic version was provided by Thomas Jefferson when he wrote to John Adams, quote, "Science has liberated the ideas of those who read and reflect, and the American example has kindled feelings of right in the people. An insurrection has consequently begun of science, talents, and courage against rank and birth, which have fallen into contempt. Science is progressive." Jefferson shared in the Enlightenment dream of the material and moral perfectibility of man through the scientific control and domination of nature. Similarly, Ben Franklin refused to exploit his invention of the Franklin stove for private profit, viewing science and its technological fruits not for his own private benefit, but for the benefit of all. Like Karl Marx, nearly 100 years later, Jefferson was particularly critical of the European factory system, which he regarded as an authoritarian version of technology, inimical to the republican form of government and the happiness of the people. Though more expensive economically, Jefferson regarded it as preferable politically and morally to import commodities from across the Atlantic. Like modern environmentalists and others, such as Kentucky farmer and poet laureate Wendell Berry, Jefferson was concerned with the effect of technological innovation on the overall quality of life. But the view that strong authority is a necessary condition of technical practice has a long and ancient history, stretching back to Plato's Republic. Always back to Plato and his distorted ideas. Where the state was likened to a large ship on the high seas, which would soon sink if the sailors did not yield to the captain's commands. Deeply entrenched in the human involvement with science and technology, an authoritarian way of life is seen by many philosophers of technology as an inevitable consequence of society accepting increasingly complicated technological systems which reduce human beings to mere appendages of machines. Critics of authoritarian technological systems, such as the French philosopher Michel Foucault, stress the hidden nature of modern technological, or what he called disciplinary power, compared with the more familiar form of political or sovereign power. Arising with the emergence of the nation-state in the 17th and 18th century, political sovereignty emanates from a unitary source, the people, the monarch, the state, represents legitimacy through the impartiality of the law, and intervenes in discontinuous ways to repress deviant behavior. Instead of emanating from a single source, technological power permeates the socio-technical system, and instead of operating through discontinuous acts of intervention, functions through the daily regulation and reinforcement of behavior designed to integrate the interests of the individual into the workings of the system. According to Herbert Marcuse, modern technological systems produce one-dimensional individuals who willingly conform to a society that limits freedom, creates false needs, and co-ops all resistance. The covert nature of technological power is a consequence of defining technologies functionally rather than politically. The conflict between democratic and authoritarian forms of technology is by no means a thing of the past. It is very much alive and kicking in current debates over energy policy. Many advocates of solar energy, for example, argue that the use of renewable energy resources is more compatible with a democratic egalitarian society than energy systems based on coal, oil, and nuclear power. Based on systems that are more accessible, comprehensible, and controllable, solar energy is technologically and politically decentralizing. This contrasts vividly with a possible nuclear future, with the need to safeguard from theft and terrorist activity. Supplies of highly radioactive plutonium could lead any government concerned with the safety and security of its citizens reasonably to require nuclear workers and ordinary citizens to undergo background security checks, covert surveillance, wiretapping, and should circumstances require, even more draconian restrictions on their civil and political liberties. Technology and democracy. What does the valence of large-scale technological systems towards strong centralized public and private management mean for our political and civil liberties? Is representative democracy as we know it adequate to their defense, or do we need a stronger form of democracy? Upholders of representative democracy seem to believe that the arrangements of power and authority inside private corporations have no bearing on public institutions, practices, and the wider culture. That, quote, democracy stops at the factory gates, end quote, is taken as a fact of life perfectly compatible with political freedom. Advocates of strong democracy, such as Richard Sclove and Langdon Winner, take issue with this perspective. They argue that representative democracy shifts the focus from the participation of citizens in the active determination of the basic structures of their society to a preoccupation with representative institutions, periodic elections, and party politics. Citizens can vote for representatives but have little direct influence on important public decisions. Strong Democrats offer a participatory theory of technology and democracy. They argue that, quote, if citizens ought to be empowered to participate in determining their society's basic structure, and technologies are important species of social structure, it follows that technological design and practice should be democratized, end quote. Technologies should be democratized procedurally by facilitating the participation of people of all walks of life in the formation of the technological order, and substantively by being compatible with the citizens' basic interests and concerns, especially their fundamental interest in democracy. Okay. To paraphrase John Dewey, strong democracy does not envisage a planned society, but one that is continually planning. The aim is to move away from the top-down, expert-based decision-making at the heart of the disastrous massive urban renewal and public housing projects of the 50s and 60s, which minimized public input in favor of technical considerations and behind-the-scenes social engineering. The goal is to effect a transaction between technical experts and affected publics that would educate experts about the needs and interests of the public and educate the public about alternative technical possibilities available to them to meet their needs and realize their interests. The fundamental lesson from current reflection on the relation between technology and politics is nicely summed up by Langdon Winner in the following words, with which I will close my talk. Quote, by far the greatest latitude of choice exists the very first time a particular instrument, system, or technique is introduced. Because choices tend to become strongly fixed in material equipment, economic investment, and social habit, the original flexibility vanishes for all practical purposes once the initial commitments are made. In that sense, technological innovations are similar to political foundings that establish a framework for public order that will endure for many generations. For that reason, the same careful attention one would give to the rules, roles, and relationships of politics must also be given to such things as the building of highways, the creation of television networks, and the tailoring of seemingly insignificant features on new machines. The issues that divide or unite people in society are settled not only in the institutions and practice of politics proper, but also, and less obviously, in tangible arrangements of steel and concrete, wires and semiconductors, and nuts and bolts.
Thank you.